So today is another day, and another day under the Jeep. I like it that way, though. Welcome to Weekend Handyman. This is going to be part 15, I think, of the Wagoneer XJ axle combination project. And today I am going to be removing the shocks. And you might think that's not very exciting, but I do, because I get to do some rust repair on this cross member that the shock's attached to. Goes from there and there. Let's see. There's a crack right here around whatever this bolt hole is for. And there is another little crack down in here. And that's just on this side. This side, there's also a crack right there. There's a crack up in here, and I have to rebuild this little corner right here. So that means making a whole bunch of patches, doing a little bit of welding, and cleaning that cross member up inside and out so it doesn't rot again. Let's get to work. So to start, the first thing that needed to be done was pretty mundane, which is remove the shocks. Luckily, I had replaced these shocks probably 3 or so years ago, so they weren't seized in or anything like that. We used rust-proof grease on them, so they came out pretty easy. No drama there, luckily. Just a little bit of wrestling here to get it to slip off the shaft, but that was it, really. And they are still good, which is what I was testing here. Now, this crack right here that was around the first bolt hole I showed was actually due in part to the fact the cross member has 2 layers of metal. And, of course, salt and whatnot got in between those, so what I decided to do was just cut out the outer layer and then weld the outer layer to the inner layer and clean that all up, and it came out well. So I got this job done. I was able to get in and weld up all around the seam between the inner plate and this outer plate on the cross member. And on this side, I ended up having to do the same thing, but I also have this right here that I got to take care of. It was all rotted out in here, so I had to cut that out. And I got 2 patches I'm going to end up welding in there, which are what these are. And that one. So we'll get to it. And because my GoPro doesn't mind getting welding sparks dropped on it, I was able to get this cool shot. But this is just a couple quick, shots of the welding I had to do in here. The patches came out really, really well. The welds came out so-so, probably because of the fact that I was contorting pretty bad to get up in here, and it was, not easy to weld, but I got it done. The patch is in there nice and solid. I can't really complain about that. I later had gone in and used the inner chassis paint to go inside of the cross member and then undercoated the out. So with all that work done, it was time to go ahead and start removing the rest of the suspension and whatnot. I had gone in and checked with the breaker bar to see how tight all these bolts were going to be. Now, luckily, when I put the suspension together before with a 3.5-inch lift, I had used copious amounts of anti-seize grease. So none of these bolts are actually seized, which was a very good thing, as I made taking this apart fairly straightforward job. And with right after that, I decided to go ahead and, since I was not going to have to do any super extra work to remove the leaf spring bolts and whatnot, I removed my drive shaft, which will be this rear drive shaft will then be flipped around and used on the front, since on an automatic XJ the front drive shaft and rear drive shaft are the same length. So that will go ahead and be used on the front. And of course, because you don't want the caps to fall off your U-joint, so I had to tape all that up. Basically, if the caps were to come off that, the U-joint is not useless. If you're lucky, you'll be able to pick up all the, if you're lucky, the needle bearings will not fall apart, but more than likely they will. So the U-joint would basically be useful, or useless at that point. So that's why I tape it up. And of course, another thing that needed to be disconnected was the e-brake cable. So that meant disassembling the rear brakes on the 8 1/4 rear end that came under the Jeep from the factory. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of cool looking when I sped it up, so I left it in there. But it was basically just removing the springs, removing the shoes, and then unhooking the e-brake cable, and then later that day I put it back together because at some point I plan to sell the rear end to somebody else who needs it for who knows what. Maybe his rear end blew up for some unknown reason, so he'll be able to continue to use mine. Rear drum brakes are a pain in the ass. My Crown Vic that I drive every day is disc brakes all the way around, and to work on those is a breeze compared to drum brakes, but yeah, it is what it is. And this is the passenger side e-brake cable. The driver side was in good shape, no problems. This side, however, or the passenger side, however, was in really bad shape, and I ultimately ended up replacing both cables because the passenger side spring that holds it onto the lever was all seized up, and it had some damage from rocks and stuff. And after all that was done, of course, I could go ahead and remove the eye bolts off the back of the leaf springs. And because there was copious amounts of rust-proof grease, as I already said, no drama here, nice and easy. Same thing for the front bolts and the leaf springs. Came out nice and easy. However, the driver's side weld nut was apparently slightly damaged at some point. Wasn't broken free, but it was damaged to the point where the bolt on that side was stuck. So I had to make an emergency trip to my local Chrysler dealership to replace the bolt, because the the weld nut basically destroyed the threads of the bolt as it was coming out. Luckily, the local Jeep dealership, or Chrysler dealership rather, had 4 in stock, so I bought 2 of them and used the one good one from the front bolt on the other side to re-tap the other side, and was able to thread the new one in no problem. So, as you saw, the rear end is out, was able to be pulled out. Relatively drama-free, except for the emergency trip to the local Chrysler dealership. But next up was putting the new leaf springs back in. Again, copious amounts of anti-seize grease or rust-proof grease were used. So so in the future, if I ever take apart the suspension again, it'll come apart just as easy as it came apart this time. And of course, before I put these springs in, I went ahead and undercoated everything where I could, or while I had it apart. So there was, no chance of rust setting in anywhere it doesn't need to be. Or at least fighting it off anyways. Rust will always happen, but the more I can do to keep it at bay, the more, the better. And with some wiggling and some prying here and there, the leaf springs went in. I think they also had to be massaged a little bit with a hammer to get them to squeeze into the brackets that are welded into the unibody frame of the XJ. Of course, a hammer is always your best tool when you're working on a Jeep. Nothing really ever lines up correctly. It's just something you get used to after a while. If only I could work this fast all the time, it would be absolutely great. But, of course, that's not actually, the case. But, oh well. And then the oh holy moment of the newer end getting put into place of where the old one was. Now, if anybody wants, I have an 8 1/4 rear end with 355 gears for sale. Or soon to be for sale, anyways. Name a price, it's yours. With a little bit of wrestling, the Dana 44 is under there. It took 2 jacks and 2 people. But everything lined up like it was supposed to. That was one of the careful measurements I took when I first got the axles, was to see if I needed to move the spring perches or whatnot, but they were the exact same distance apart as the stock XJ ones, so no work was needed there. Shock mounts, however, will need to be welded back on. Or, well, new ones anyways. There's no point using the stock ones, I don't like them. And that just about does it for part 15 of the Wagoneer XJ Axles project. This episode included a lot of sped up footage, but it made sense for this episode since it was taking apart, removing one rear end and putting the rear end under there. So as you notice or can see, the shackle is basically hitting the back part of the shackle box, for lack of a better word. At ride height, I think I have about an inch or so of, downward Jeep movement before that shackle just crashed into the back of the shackle box, air quotes. And that's due in part to the fact that the Rubicon Express springs that I am using are longer eyebolt to eyebolt, which requires you to use a boomerang shackle. So that's what I went ahead and did, and I got myself a set of Iron Rock off-road boomerang shackles. As I'm recording this, they're on the Jeep now. They work fine, everything clears, so problem is basically solved. Now, boomerang shackle, if you're wondering, is just a shackle that's shaped like a boomerang. It has a curve in it, basically, so the top half of it will be more straight up and down, while the bottom half of it will be bent back to at where a normal shackle angle would be, which, if you're wondering, should be about 45 degrees. So, problem solved, I suppose. There's not much else I can say to that. I could have, cut out the back part of the shackle box, but I figured trying out the boomerang shackle would be a better option, and it worked. The last thing I did was just snug up the U-bolt nuts pretty good, and call it a day. Be sure to click subscribe, click that like button, and come back again.